And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the best commanders of the year. That was 2022, and this was a long list to choose from. As a lot of people have already pointed out, we had an absurd amount of commanders this year. In fact, I already pointed this out back in like September when I noticed this ridiculous flood of legendary creatures we were getting. Dominaria United being the set that has the most commanders of all time, and that was right after we had gotten Baldur's Gate, which had a ton of commanders, also had the backgrounds in it. And then, of course, we got Warhammer 40k after that, and Brothers War after that, and we just kept on getting more stuff. The number that I have heard is 425 commanders this year. However, I believe some of them are only for MTG Arena. I also believe they're including the backgrounds, which technically aren't commanders, right? You can only have a background in the command zone if you have a background commander. So I wouldn't include those as well. I believe the official number is more like 332, something like that. Still absolutely absurd amount of legendary creatures this year. There's obviously a larger topic of discussion here to be had, but I will save that for my year-end video. For now, I just went through all of them and picked out the 20 best that I think are from this year. And, you know, I take a lot into consideration when I look at what I think the best commanders of the year are. They're not necessarily going to be the most popular ones. In fact, some of the most popular commanders of this year, I don't think are very good commanders at all. And I'm actually kind of surprised how popular they are. At the same time, though, there are some very, very popular commanders that I have on this list as well, because I think they're also interesting. I say all the time, I think commanders are popular for two reasons. One, they're doing something unique and interesting, and are also doing something powerful, because most people don't want to play an underwhelming commander, right? So let's get started with an honorable mention, and that is Kharn the Betrayer. 3 in a red, Astartes Berserker 5/1. Kharn the Betrayer attacks or blocks each combat if able. Whenever you lose control of Kharn the Betrayer, draw 2 cards. If damage would be dealt to Kharn the Betrayer, prevent that damage, and an opponent of your choice gains control of it. So this can have my, I guess, maybe honorary award for most interesting commander of the year. I absolutely love this. So the first time I saw it, when I did the spoiler video for it, I thought it was super incredibly interesting. The wheels immediately started turning, coming up with ways to do this. Thankfully, one of my patrons actually wanted me to do a deck for them for Kharn the Betrayer, which I absolutely loved putting that deck together. It was tons of fun. In fact, I will put the link for that deck in the description below for you guys to check out if you want to, because I just think this is a super interesting, fun commander. I absolutely would be thrilled if my opponent sat down at a table to play a game with me and they had this guy as their commander. I think he's a super interesting commander. Obviously, he's not going to be really popular. He is a little difficult to play, but very, very unique. All right, getting to the list, starting out at number 20, Braid's Arisen Nightmare, 1 black, Nightmare 3/3. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. Each opponent who does, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So first of all, I'll just say this is a triggered ability. I've covered this a lot on my channel. I literally just had a question about this from somebody. No, you cannot put Rings of Brighthearth in your Braid's Arisen Nightmare deck. It won't work. At least it won't work with your commander. This is a triggered ability. That being said, what I really like about this commander, there's a couple of things. First of all, I love that they fixed Braids. Now, I've talked about banned cards in the format. Of course, the original Braids, the mono black Braids, is banned in the format. I don't necessarily think it should be. I can totally understand why people don't think it's very fun. There is lots of unfun cards in the format already. That being said, this is the more fun, interesting version. They basically took the original Braids, I think, and said, let's make a more fun, interesting commander. Now, of course, you're still forcing your opponents to sack things, but you're giving them the option, which is great. It does it in a very politics way, which of course is a lot better in Commander. I love that you can choose the type that you are sacrificing. One of my favorite cards of all time is World Queller, which actually does a very similar thing where you're choosing a permanent type and then everyone else has to do it as well. So Braids does something very similar to that. Really great job they did, I think, making this more fixed version of Braids for Commander. Coming in at number 19, Ratatrabek of Urborg, 2 white and a black zombie wizard 3/3. Vigilance, Ward 2. Other zombies you control have Vigilance. But of course, with Ratatrabek, you are building around that last ability. Whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary and it's a 2/2 black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. And of course, you're making zombies, so that fits into the zombie part of it, and they're going to have Vigilance, so that's a nice little added bonus, but you're definitely building around that last ability, and it is such a unique, interesting ability. It's sort of legendary tribal, right? right? You want lots of legendary creatures in this deck. When they die, you're making a token copy of them that also happens to be a zombie. So you can do some zombie tribal stuff here, but I'm not just going to throw a bunch of zombies in this deck. I want legendary creatures in this deck. The more, the merrier. If I'm putting this deck together, I want like 40 legendary creatures in this deck so I can be maximizing the use of my commander's ability. Very interesting, unique ability on this guy. Coming in at number 18, Henzi Toolbox Tori. Black, red, and a green Devil Rogue 3/3. Each creature spell you cast with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. The Blitz cost is equal to its mana cost. And Blitz costs you pay costs 1 less for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. And of course, Blitz means you may choose to cast that spell for its Blitz cost. If you do, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card and sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So basically, it's sneak attack on your commander, right? Which of course is incredible in the command zone. Having a commander, and this isn't a very expensive commander either, it only costs 3 mana. So you can get this guy out right away and start going to town. I say it all the time, I like my commanders to be cheap, especially if I'm building around them heavily. If I really need my commander to be in play in order for my deck to be doing stuff, it's got to be cheap. If it costs 6 mana, that's not really going to work for me, right? So this guy's only 3 mana. I can get him out right away and immediately start firing creatures into play. You're filling your graveyard, of course, because you're sacrificing them. You can build around that part of it. You get the card draw, which is great. I would say that this commander is higher on the whole power level part of things and maybe a little bit lower on the unique, interesting part because it is sort of just a sneak attack in the command zone. Still a great commander, though. Coming in at 17, Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor. 1 black, Phyrexian Praetor 3/3. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. So before we get to anything else, that ability is pretty interesting, right? It's whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, which means you can do the whole enticing your opponents to attack each other thing, right? You can really just build around that part of it. You can get in for damage with your creatures. You can be drawing cards. Your opponents are going to want to attack each other so that they can draw cards as well. They're also paying life, so they're hitting their own life totals as well, which is interesting. Also, though, we have 4 black, discard X cards. Exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. Very powerful ability, of course. The cost for it is high, but the payoff might be high as well. Again, you're playing into a little bit of what could happen sort of scenario where you're going to exile a bunch of stuff off the top of your opponent's library. Maybe you're going to get bombs. Maybe you're going to get nothing. It's a risk. It always is. Obviously, Villainous Wealth is the comparison here. People love that card a whole lot. This is that ability essentially stapled on your commander. Now you have to discard the cards. However, I see that as an upside. We can put some discard tribal stuff in here. I think it's a great design, really interesting commander. And of course, it is also Gix, which is a card that I have been waiting for since the beginnings of my days playing Magic in Tempest block. I've been waiting forever for an actual legendary creature Gix card, and we finally got one, so I'm super pumped about that as well. Coming in at number 16, Magus Lucia Kane. 1 green, blue and a red, human, Tyrannid, wizard, 1/1. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. There's something you already can just build around with your deck. Just Temur +1/+1 counter theme. We haven't seen that before. Here's a way to do it. More importantly, though, you can tap, add to colorless. When you next cast a spell with X in its mana cost or activate an ability with an X in its activation cost this turn, copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. Very interesting ability. Again, we have that unique factor that we've never seen before. First of all, the notable thing here is you can tap your commander to add 2 colorless mana and use it for anything. You can just cast an Arcane Signet with it if you want to. It doesn't have to be using this ability. You probably do want to use the ability though. So you're doing X tribal here. Now people have pointed out that the +1/+1 counter theme and the X tribal thing fit with Hydras. So you can do Hydras here that will fit both of these abilities. I more want to be looking for really interesting things that I can do with the activation part of it. Again, I like the uniqueness here, and we have never before seen that activate an ability with an X in its activation cost and we get to copy it. So now I get to go down the rabbit hole and find all these interesting cards with X in their activation cost that I can use my commander's ability for. Really interesting, unique commander without a question. Coming in at number 15, Merkle, Lord of Bones. 4 white, black, and a green god 7/5. As long as your life total is less than or equal to half your starting life total, Merkle, Lord of Bones has indestructible. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's an enchantment and loses all other card types. So talk about uniqueness here. It doesn't get much more unique than this. There is no card in the history of the game that is doing what this card is doing. That's why I had to put it on the list. I don't love that it costs 7. That's a lot. Again, I like to get my commander out a little sooner so I can start going to town. However, this is a commander that requires a little bit of setup, so that's okay. This ability is just incredibly unique. There's so many interesting, again, going down that rabbit hole, figuring all the interesting ways you can use this guy as your commander. I'm sure there's a ton. There's already over 4,000 decks on EDH Rec for this guy, so I'm sure there's lots of people that are going down lots of different directions with it. I always love commanders where when I sit down at a table, I'm not sure what they're doing. There's a lot of different directions you could be going in. Obviously, you're going to put a lot of creatures in your deck. That's about it. That's the only stipulation with this commander. Every time I sit down and play against this commander, it's going to be a completely different deck probably, right? I love that. Coming in at number 14, Miral, Shield of Argive, 3 and a white, human soldier, 3/4. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Just that ability stapled on your creature is fantastic. Of course, Grand Abolisher is a card that's been used in the format since forever. Probably the two biggest reasons why you would want to use it is, first of all, your stuff can't get countered. So on your turn, just this nice, warm, safe feeling that you get knowing your opponents can't screw with anything you're doing. But I think even more importantly in this deck, because you are an attacky theme, it prevents your opponents from doing that settle the wreckage Aether Spouts type of play, which I like so much. And let me tell you, I hate when my opponents have a Grand Abolisher in play because it means that Aether Spout sitting in my hand I can't use. So that is a huge added bonus to have that stapled on your commander. But also when Miral, Shield of Argive attacks, create X 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. So we're in Soldier Tribal and Miral is doing it in a fantastic way. She really is cranking out those soldier tokens pretty darn quickly. Soldier Tribal obviously has an absolute ton of support in the game already, even just in mono white. Interestingly enough, they're also artifact creatures, so you could do a little bit of artifact creature tribal here as well. I don't know if you need to, because like I said, Soldier Tribal is so wide and variant already, but that is another interesting way to go with it. This is a really powerful commander. Again, as far as uniqueness goes, it's not super unique. You're just doing Soldier Tribal. However, power level, I think this is one of the most powerful commanders we've got in the year. You really can run your opponents over with this commander. Coming in at number 13, Jetmir, Nexus of Revels. Speaking of commanders that you can just run over your opponents with, this probably is number 1 on that list. 1 red, a green, and a white, cat demon, 5/4. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have vigilance as long as you control 3 or more creatures. Creatures you control also get +1/+0 and have trample as long as you control 6 or more creatures. And creatures you control also get +1/+0 and have double strike as long as you control 9 or more creatures. So bringing that all together, if you control 9 or more creatures, your creatures will all get +3/+0, vigilance, trample, and double strike. Pretty darn good. This probably is the best go wide commander that we have in the entire format now. Really, you just want to crank out those token creatures or whatever as fast as you possibly can. There is some interesting ways to go with this, I suppose. You can do any different tribe here, right? Any tribe would be okay with this. I guess you could do cat tribal because your commander's a cat. You could do tokens. I think a lot of people have done token themes here because tokens are a lot easier to get out. You could also just do normal creatures. Doesn't matter. There's a lot of different directions you could go here. At the end of the day, this is probably the best go wide strategy commander that we have in the format. Not super interesting. Again, the power level is really high here. Uniqueness, not so much. That's why I put it around this spot. It certainly is one of the most powerful commanders we've gotten in this year, no doubt about it. Coming in at number 12, Mishra, Eminent One. 2 blue, black, and a red human artificer, 5/4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of target non-creature artifact you control, except its name is Mishra's War Form, and it's a 4/4 construct artifact creature in addition to its other types. Gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So on the other end of the spectrum here, this is a commander that I don't think is incredibly powerful by any stretch of the imagination. However, very unique, interesting ability. In fact, I found this ability to be so unique and interesting that I had to build a deck around it. I did this on my channel, made a very unique and interesting deck with this guy. Feel free to check it out if you want to. Very open-ended ability, right? You are turning a non-creature artifact into a creature, so that on its own is kind of interesting. You're making a copy of something, you're sacrificing at the beginning of the next end step. There's a lot of different directions you can go here. I love this guy's great commander. Coming in at number 11, Magar of the Magic Strings. 1 black and a red Minotaur Performer 3/3. Pay 1 black and a red. Note the name of target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard and put it onto the battlefield face down. It's a 3/3 creature with, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may create a copy of the card with the noted name. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost, and if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. This is actually a really great commander. Yes, it is from Unfinity, but as I said when I did the spoiler video for this guy, if you change the name to Magar the Vengeful or something and change the creature type to just Minotaur Wizard, you could very easily see this card in any other set. You could put this in a commander set, for example, and nobody would blink an eye. Now, the ability is very unique, right? This is an incredibly unique ability. Again, something we've never ever seen before. Also is powerful, so we're hitting on both of those points. However, even though it is something we haven't seen before, I wouldn't consider this an unability. And even though it requires a little bit of explanation possibly, it is something that isn't completely out of the ordinary. So even though this is an Unfinity card and it may be on the goofy side, I actually think it is a really great commander. Getting into the top 10, Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief. Blue and a green, Fairy Rogue 2/1 with flying. Whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief, you may copy the spell. The copy targets Ivy. So I have a confession to make because I have not mentioned this card on my channel yet, and there is a specific reason why. I didn't have this in my best commanders from Dominaria, even though I probably should have. And the reason why is because I screwed up. I made a mistake on this card. I read it wrong. When I first looked at it, and again, we had an absurd amount of stuff from Dominaria, the most commanders ever. So I gotta admit, I was rushing a little bit. And when I first read this guy over, I thought that you had to target. I didn't realize it was a May. So when I looked at it, I thought, okay, well, as soon as someone casts a lightning bolt, your commander's dead. All they have to do is target some other creature and your Ivy will get targeted as well and it will die. That's not a very good commander. I didn't realize that it is a May. You don't have to copy the lightning bolt or the path to exile or whatever. You can just copy the good stuff, right? So this is a pretty darn good commander and a very unique one again as well. As people have pointed out, if you get into the situation where your opponent is playing a Voltron deck, they're probably going to be targeting their own commander with a whole lot of spells and you're going to be able to steal those, right? This is a spell thief after all. So you can do a couple of different directions here where, yes, I want to be casting stuff on my own creatures that my Ivy can copy, but also I can be using my opponent's stuff as well if I happen to be in that situation. It certainly is a very interesting, unique commander, no question. Coming in at number 9, Preston the Vanisher, 3 and a white, Rabbit Wizard 2/5. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't cast, create a token that's a copy of that creature except it's an 0/1 white illusion. And you can pay 1 and a white, sacrifice 5 illusions, exile target non-land permanent. So, mono white illusion tribal, am I right? Not really. I would say there's probably no support at all in mono white for illusion tribal. There's probably a few illusions that you could throw in this deck, but I wouldn't do that at all. That ability on the bottom of sacrifice 5 illusions is just added bonus. This to me is an ETB strategy. I'm just going to put a bunch of creatures in this deck with ETBs, maybe do some blinking. I'm going to create all those illusion tokens. They're 0/1s, but I'm still getting the ETB, the enter the battlefield ability off of those creatures. And then once you accumulate a bunch of those 0/1 tokens, now they're just sitting around. They're not doing you much good. Now you can sacrifice them to exile target non-land permanent. So nice little added bonus on your commander as well. We got a ton of fantastic mono white commanders this year. They're not backing off at all on the whole mono white needs help thing. This to me is the most interesting, maybe the most powerful as well. I guess I'll give a shout out to Giada and Lightpaws, both of which are currently the most popular mono white commanders in the format. I don't think that's going to last though. Again, I think we got so many great mono white commanders, especially later in the year, that I don't even think Giada and Lightpaws are going to hang on. Even though they only came out this year, I think they're going to get kicked off the top of the mountain by some of these other ones. Coming in at number 8, Torwaki the Younger, 3 black and a red human archer 3/3, has reach and lifelink. If another source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage plus 1 to that permanent or player instead. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Torwaki the Younger deals 2 damage to any target. There's just so much going on this commander. Again, this is one that I talked about in a spoiler video I did, and as I was going, I'm like, okay, well, you can do this, and then you can do that, and you can do this. There's so much you can do here. I'm shocked that this is just an uncommon, because this commander is fantastic, and there's a ton of directions you can go with it. First of all, your commander is throwing around damage and also also has lifelink. That's pretty fantastic. So you could very easily do a Rakdos life gain deck here because you are gaining life on the regular, without question. You can do a Spellslinger theme. Again, in Rakdos colors, that is kind of rare, but whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, your commander's dealing damage to any target. Pretty fantastic little bonus from casting instant and sorceries, but the ability that it probably is the best here is that middle one. If another source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1, and there is a million ways in the commander format to be doing that. Again, we're going to go down the rabbit hole here, and we're going to find all those interesting ways. I mean, you're in black and red, so of course there is an absolute ton of ways to be dealing damage that is not combat damage, an absolute ton. One of the most interesting things about this deck is that you can not attack your opponents at all. You could very easily win the game with this commander without any attacking at all, just throwing damage around like crazy. I just think this is a super interesting commander, one of the best of the year. Coming in at number 7, Marneus Calgar, 2 white, black, and a blue Astartes warrior, 3/5, has double strike, and whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Geez, that's pretty good, right? You can also pay 6, create 2/2 white Astartes warrior creature tokens with vigilance. I don't know how often you're going to want to do that. Obviously, it works with your commander's other ability, but there's so many way easier ways to make tokens in this format that I don't know if you're ever going to want to use that ability. 6 mana is a lot just to make a couple of tokens. We just had Benny Brax earlier this year. Again, speaking about awesome mono white commanders, at least I think so. There's another one. And then it immediately got trumped later in the year by Marneus Calgar, which is just a straight up better token commander, right? This is whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield. Doesn't have to be creature tokens. It can be treasure tokens. A Smothering Tithe is obviously bananas in this deck because this is just whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control. So every single turn, if your opponent doesn't pay the 2 for the Smothering Tithe, you get that treasure token, and then you also get to draw a card because you just had a token enter the battlefield. And then if they draw a card later on the turn, it happens again, right? So just fantastic payoff for having tokens enter the battlefield. The best token commander in the format now, I think. I don't know what's better. Coming in at number 6, Ashnod the Uncaring, 2 blue, black, and a red human artificer, 1/4 with death touch. Whenever you activate an ability of an artifact or creature that isn't a mana ability, if one or more permanents were sacrificed to activate it, you may copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So once again, speaking about characters in the game, legendary creatures that I had been looking forward to since forever, Ashnod was one that you had seen referenced on cards. We never actually saw the character before. Now we've finally seen it. They printed another one in this set. That one's not so good. The mono black one is a little underwhelming. I wasn't super impressed by that. But when I saw this one, I was like, okay, here we go. Fantastic ability. First of all, having that commander with death touch, a 1/4, is like really fantastic, especially when you have it just sitting there on the battlefield. You don't want to be attacking or tapping it or anything. Just makes for a great blocker. However, that ability, man, what a great ability to build around. Again, incredibly unique, something that we've never seen before, and also incredibly open-ended, right? Whenever you activate an ability of an artifact or creature, geez, that's a whole lot of cards, right? As long as it's not a mana ability, if you sacrificed a permanent to do so, you get to copy it. Again, we go down the rabbit hole. There's got to be thousands of ways that you can use this commander. When I sit down at a table, am I going to be playing against an Ashnod the Uncaring deck that's going to be doing artifact tribal? Maybe they're doing some sort of tribe in general that fits this theme. They could do an aristocrats theme. You could just go in so many different directions with this commander. I think it's a really powerful ability. It is obviously a very unique one as well that you can go in a lot of different directions with. Fantastic job they did there. Coming in at number 5, Hazazon, Shaper of Sand, red, green, and a white human warrior, 3/3, has Desert Walk. That's pretty interesting. First time we've ever seen Desert Walk on a commander. Not sure if you want to build around it. Obviously, your opponents have to have deserts in order for that to work. So not a lot of build-aroundable ability there, but it is very flavorful. This is incredibly flavorful commander. You may play desert lands from your graveyard. Also, whenever a desert enters the battlefield under your control, create 2 1/1 red, green, white Sand Warrior creature tokens. So of course, we got to give a shout out to the original Hazazon, which was doing something very similar, creating those Sand Warrior tokens. Cares about your lands, but of course, back then we didn't have the desert land type. Now we do, so we have a dedicated desert commander here, which is interesting. But also, there's a lot you can do here. I started thinking about all the different things you could do with this commander, so I ended up doing this one on my channel as well. You can check that deck out if you want to. You're playing lands from your graveyard. You want deserts, obviously. You probably want all the deserts you can pack into this deck. You're also making tokens. those tokens are also red, green, and white, which I think is significant. There's just a whole lot of directions you can go here. Even though it doesn't seem like it at first, there actually is a whole bunch you can do. You can check out what I did with the deck for this guy. Fantastic commander for sure. Coming in at number 4, Kibu Uktabi Prince, 2 and a green, Monkey Noble 2/2. Tap, each player creates a colorless artifact token named Banana. With tap, sacrifice this artifact at a red or a green, you gain 2 life. Seriously, no matter how many times I read this card, I don't know if I can stop giggling whenever I say banana. Moving on though, whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. That's an ape or a monkey. And also, whenever Kibu attacks, defending player sacrifices an artifact. Man, they just packed so much on this card, and all of it is very, very interesting. This commander just came out like a month ago, and I still think it is one of the best commanders of the entire year. Super interesting build around. Now, first off, I should note this is indeed a Gruul commander. We have that red pip there, so you are in red and green. We have that very interesting ability where you're tapping and giving a token to everybody, which you can build around. Your opponents are gaining life, which you can build around. Of course, you want your opponents to be sacrificing or having artifacts go to their graveyard is very easy to build around. You're in an ape monkey tribal theme here, which you can build around. You're also in a +1/+1 counter theme because you're putting +1/+1 counters on your team, your commander included, which obviously you can build around. And then also when your commander attacks, defending player has to sacrifice an artifact. There is just so much to build around here. I think you probably want to build around all of it to a certain extent, but maybe you pick which direction you more want to lean into. Again, I did this one on my channel. I leaned into all those different directions. I made a super interesting, fun deck. Again, you can check that one out if you want to. Really great job they did with this one. One of my favorites of the year. Coming in at number 3, Hinata Dawn Crowned, 1 blue, red, and a white. Kieran Spirit 4/4, flying and trample. None of that matters at all though, because we have an absolutely absurd ability here. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target. That's bonkers. But then on top of that, spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast for each target. So if we just look at one card here, just to give you an idea, if you haven't seen this guy in action yet, let's talk about Heliod's Intervention. X, white, white, instant. Choose one. Destroy X target artifacts and or enchantments. Target player gains twice X life. So we're not going to be getting X life here. We're going to be destroying artifacts or enchantments. So I did a deck doctor again for my patrons Hinata deck, and what I realized is what you want in the deck more than anything are X spells that target X things, because the X is essentially 0. The more things you target, the less the spell casts. So with Heliod's Intervention, it just becomes white and a white, destroy any number of artifacts or enchantments on the table. Pretty busted, right? And of course, there is an endless amount of cards that you can be putting in this deck that is doing so. As far as uniqueness goes, I mean, it's pretty unique. And as far as power level goes, that's incredibly high as well. I'm actually shocked this isn't more popular. When this came out in Neon Dynasty, I thought this might be the most popular from the set. I thought it might be one of the most popular commanders of the year. Maybe it's going too far, right? We've gotten to a point now where when these super busted commanders come out, people don't necessarily go after them because they want to go after the more interesting ones like Kibu or Hazazon, for example, right? So I find it interesting that this actually isn't one of the most popular commanders of the year. It does have 5,700 decks on EDHREC. That's pretty good, but it doesn't even come close to touching the most popular commanders of the year. Again, I'm just wondering if there is a fatigue here of, okay, well, all right, another busted powerful commander, and people are sort of losing interest in commanders like that and sort of gravitating towards the more unique ones that can do interesting things. Might be the case. Not necessarily a bad thing. Speaking of unique and interesting commanders, coming in at number 2 for me this year is Gearson Starn Keller Morph. I love this guy. 1 blue and a red, Tyranid Human 3/2, Ward 2. Again, like that. However, this ability is so incredibly unique. Whenever another source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player, Gearson Starn Keller Morph deals 2 damage to that permanent or player. What an incredible ability. And I gotta say, the flavor here as well is really, really great. You know, a lot of the flavor on a lot of these commanders are really fantastic as well. That also plays into it here for the ranking a little bit. I don't know anything about this guy. It was from Warhammer 40k. I don't play Warhammer 40k, but I'm just looking at the picture and he's got his pistols and he's shooting people. And I'm just thinking the flavor here has got to be fantastic. So whenever you deal 1 damage to something, you're basically lasing the target or something, and your Gearson Starn is going to shoot that thing as well. This card is just hilarious on top of the fact that it's a fantastic build around. Again, again, we're opening the floodgates here. How many things can we find in red and blue colors that are dealing exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player? There's got to be a whole ton, right? You can go in so many different directions with this guy. I bet people are having a ton of fun building around this commander and finding all the interesting ways they can use its ability. Really fantastic design. Probably, on a personal level, I think my favorite commander of the year. I don't necessarily think it's the best of the year, but for me, it's my personal favorite. I think it's great. Coming in at number 1, though, and I probably would get absolutely lambasted if I didn't have this at number 1, is Ishin 2 Heavens as 1 red, white, and a black human samurai 3/4. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So when I first saw this guy, I was a little less impressed than everyone else. I thought, well, it's Wolfgar, right? We just had a commander like this come out a few months ago, just in different colors. That's not super interesting. So I thought it would be popular for sure. I thought it would be one of the most popular commanders from the set. I didn't think it would be the most popular commander of the year, which it is. In fact, Ishin 2 Heavens as 1 is already the 10th most popular commander in the entire format, and it hasn't even been out for a year yet. So I imagine in a few more months, it's going to be climbing a little higher up the ladder. I can't believe how popular this guy is. Now, again, I made a mistake with this guy that was pointed out to me very soon after. Okay, this is not just like Wolfgar. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control the trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, which means, first of all, it's any permanent you control that is triggering off of a creature attacking, but also it's any creature attacking, including your opponents. So if you have a card that triggers off your opponent's attacking, that's going to trigger double as well. So there's a lot of different directions you can go here. Again, I thought this was going to be a very one-dimensional commander, but there's a ton of things you can do with this guy. Famously, Fervent Charge, a card that I talked about way early on in my 10 cards videos. I think it was like episode number 4 or 5 or something like that, about how it's a great card if you're in any attacky theme in Marduk colors. Used to be like $1.25 or something like that. After Ishin 2 Heavens as 1 came out, that card jumped up to like $40 because everyone was trying to get their hands on one for their Ishin deck. Kind of funny. But there's a perfect example, right, of a permanent that is triggering off of your creatures attacking. Great fit in the deck, obviously, right? Really unique commander, no question. Really, really powerful commander as well. And again, it's just that 3 mana, which I really, really like to see, right? I can get my commander out very early, probably even on turn 2, and immediately start going to town. I like that on a commander as well. Certainly a fantastic build around. Probably the best of the year for sure. But that is it. That is all the 20 best commanders from 2022. And I managed to whittle it down to 20, despite the fact that we had an absurd amount of commanders this year. Again, though, I will be talking about that in my year-end video, giving my sort of rundown of my opinions on that whole matter. I will just say my opinions have changed a little bit. I am a little more hopeful than maybe some other content creators, but we will save that for another video. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.